The bailiff called the case like he was reading a grocery list, and my sister stood up before the last syllable landed, not because she was eager to honor my grandfather, but because she was eager to claim him. She wore a tailored cream coat over black, the kind of quiet luxury that makes people assume you are right before you even speak. Her hair was a work of architecture, and her face was perfectly dry. Behind her, my parents, Kenneth and Stephanie, nodded like rehearsed backup singers. They were entirely confident that the judge would sign the order and erase me today. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. Madison's attorney, a man with a voice like oiled silk and a watch that cost more than my first car, did not waste a second. He slid a thick stack of papers across the mahogany table toward the judge with clinical precision. He began to speak about my alleged instability. He used words like erratic behavior and psychological fragility. He told the court that I was a risk to the $150 million estate my grandfather had built. To him and to my family, I was not a grieving granddaughter. I was a line item that needed to be zeroed out. I sat there and I watched them. My mother, Stephanie, had adjusted her expression to a perfect mask of synthetic concern. My father, Kenneth, looked at his reflection in the polished wood of the table, probably calculating his share of the liquidation. They were not shocked by what they were doing. They were only shocked that I was sitting there refusing to play the role of the broken victim they had written for me. My compassion for them had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. Today, the account was closed. The judge leaned forward, his eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. He looked at the motion for emergency guardianship. Then he looked at me. The silence in the room was heavy, smelling of old paper and expensive leather. "Miss Vale," the judge said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "this is a serious filing. It alleges you are a danger to yourself and the assets of this estate. Do you have an objection?" I did not let my pulse quicken. I did not let my hands shake. I stood up slowly, keeping my spine as straight as the skyscrapers my grandfather used to design. I looked the judge directly in the eye. I did not cry. I did not ask why my own flesh and blood would try to strip me of my basic rights. I simply spoke. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I object." Madison's attorney let out a breath that was halfway to a laugh. He looked at me with a patronizing smirk, as if I were a child reciting a poem I did not understand. "On what grounds, Miss Vale?" he asked. "The medical concerns are documented. The family is in agreement. You are clearly incapable of managing a legacy of this magnitude." I did not look at him. I kept my focus on the bench. "I object because you are asking the court to make a ruling based on an incomplete ledger," I said. My voice was a flat line, clinical and certain. "You are looking at a story my sister told you. I am asking you to wait for the record." The judge adjusted his glasses, his interest clearly piqued. "What record are you referring to?" he asked. "And what does that have to do with your mental capacity?" "I am asking the court to delay any signature on this order until the last person arrives," I replied. I did not offer a name. I did not offer an explanation. I simply stood my ground. Madison leaned over to her attorney and whispered something sharp, her eyes cutting to me, with a mixture of confusion and pure, unadulterated coldness. She thought she had accounted for every variable. She was wrong. She had forgotten that in a world of stories, a record always carries more weight. I sat back down and waited for the heavy oak doors to open. I knew the person holding the truth was already in the hallway. The courtroom stayed quiet, but in my head, the silence was deafening. I looked at the grain of the mahogany table, tracing the lines of the wood with my eyes. This room, with its high ceilings and heavy drapes, smelled like old paper, lemon oil, and the kind of expensive leather that only people like my father can afford. It was a familiar scent. It was the scent of the home I grew up in, a home built on foundations of prestige and secret ledgers. I knew what they were thinking. My mother was probably wondering why her unstable daughter was not trembling. My father was likely irritated that I was wasting his time. And Madison? Madison was probably already redecorating our grandfather's estate. in her mind. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for 27 years, and they were used to my silence. They mistook it for weakness. They did not realize that my silence was not a choice. It was an architecture. It was a prison I had built to keep myself safe. You see, in my family, there were bars without a prison. I grew up in what most people would call a palace, but to me, it was a house of glass, where every movement was judged and every word was a potential fracture. I learned very early on that to survive, I had to be invisible. If I did not speak, they could not misinterpret me. If I did not want anything, they could not take it away. It was a strategy of survival, a way to move through the rooms without setting off the alarms of my parents' disappointment. I looked at Kenneth and Stephanie. They looked so dignified. They looked like the kind of people who follow every rule. But I remembered the day the glass finally shattered for me. It was 3 years ago. I was finishing my master's degree in architectural history, preparing for the doctorate program my grandfather had promised to fund. He had set up an education trust for me when I was born. $1,500,000. It was my future. It was my ticket out of their shadow. I remember sitting in my father's office, the same smell of leather and polish filling the air. I had asked about the paperwork for the tuition transfer. He did not look up from his desk. He did not even stop typing. He just said, we had to reallocate those resources. Grace, Madison needed the liquidity for her first high-rise investment downtown. It was a family investment. $1,500,000. Just like that, my future was a resource that had been reallocated. They had not asked. They had not even told me. They had simply reached into my life and taken the foundation out from under me because Madison was the future and I was just the spare. To them, my education was a luxury, but Madison's ambition was a necessity. I realized then that my love for them had been a subscription and they had been canceling my benefits for years while I was still footing the bill. I did not scream that day. I did not throw a chair. I just walked out and started working 3 jobs. I became an architectural historian because I wanted to understand how things are built, how to spot the cracks in the facade before the whole building comes down. I spent years studying the bones of this city while my family treated me like a ghost in their hallways. I stayed quiet, not because I was afraid, but because I was waiting. I was documenting. I was becoming the person who knows where all the bodies are buried, because I was the one they ignored while they were digging the holes. The judge was still watching me, waiting for me to explain my objection. I could feel the invisible shackles of 27 years trying to pull me back down into my seat. The voice in my head, the one that sounds like my mother was whispering that I was being dramatic, that I was embarrassing them, that I should just let Madison have what she wanted so we could all go back to the quiet. But then I thought about my grandfather. He was the only one who really saw me. He knew what they were. He knew that Kenneth and Stephanie worshipped at the altar of social standing, and that Madison was a predator in a cream-colored coat. He saw the prison without bars they had built around me. And in his final months, he decided to give me the keys. This courtroom battle is not about the $150 million. It is not about the real estate or the stocks or the historic estate. It is about the record. It is about the fact that for the first time in my life, I refuse to be a footnote in Madison's story. I am the primary witness. I am the survivor. And the person I am waiting for, the man who is currently walking toward these doors, is bringing the only thing that can break the glass forever. I looked at Madison. She was checking her watch, an impatient flick of the wrist. She thought she was the architect of this day. She did not realize that I had been studying the blueprints of their deceit for a lifetime. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. It was the cold clarity of an accountant looking at a fraudulent balance sheet. I reached for my water glass, my hand steady as a rock. The retaliation was already complete. They just had not seen the numbers yet. Madison realized the clock was working against her. She did not wait for the man in black to arrive. She pivoted. This was her secondary strategy. Character liquidation. She looked at the judge, her eyes shimmering with a practiced liquid sorrow that she had used to get her way since she was 6 years old. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dropping into a register, designed to evoke maximum sympathy. We did not want to bring this up in public. We wanted to protect Grace's dignity. But her behavior over the last year, it has been beyond concerning. We are truly afraid for her. My mother, Stephanie, took her cue with the precision of a professional actress. The silk handkerchief appeared from her clutch, dabbed precisely at the corners of her eyes. It smelled like lavender and old lies, a familiar scent that used to make me feel guilty, but now only made me feel clinical. She isolated him, my mother whispered, her voice trembling just enough to be heard in the back of the room. She moved into my father's house and closed the doors. She would not answer our calls. She convinced a dying man that his own daughter did not care for him. She has been erratic, paranoid. We think she has had a total psychological collapse. This was the theater of toxicity. I watched them with the cold eyes of a forensic auditor. I did not interrupt. I did not yell. I did not even blink. I sat there and mentally checked off the line items on their balance sheet of deceit. This was not a family crisis. It was a production, and I was the only one in the room who knew the budget for their special effects. My mother's tears were a currency that had no value in my vault anymore. She was trying to manufacture a narrative of my instability to justify their theft. It was a calculated move. If they could prove I was mentally fragile, they could invalidate every decision my grandfather had made in his final months. They brought out the supporting cast next. My aunt and a cousin I had not spoken to in 3 years stood up near the back rows. They looked like they had been drafted into a war they did not understand, their eyes darting away from mine. They testified to my supposed erratic behavior. They used the words Madison had likely coached them on: unstable, controlling, gatekeeping. They told the judge that I had been poisoning my grandfather's mind against the rest of the family while he was too weak to defend himself. Madison watched me while they spoke, her chin tilted up. She was looking for a crack in my facade. She wanted me to stand up and scream that they were liars. She wanted the drama our mother had warned the judge about. She wanted to provoke the very instability she was accusing me of. But I knew that in this courtroom, the loudest person is not the one who wins. The one who wins is the one who holds the final ledger. We are just trying to save her from herself, Madison said, turning back to the judge, with a look of heavy responsibility. Grace needs a guardian, not a $150 million estate to mismanage. We are the only ones who can protect this legacy. I checked my own watch. The time was up. I could smell the lavender perfume across the table, heavy and suffocating. But I stayed still, an anchor in their storm of performance grief. I was the silent witness to their bankruptcy of character. They thought they were building a case against my sanity, but all they were doing was providing the court with a permanent record of their own malice. They were the architects of their own ruin. They just had not realized that the foundation they were standing on was already hollow. I looked at the heavy oak doors. Right on time. The heavy oak doors did not swing open with drama. They opened with a quiet, controlled click, the sound of a well-oiled machine doing exactly what it was designed to do. A man stepped inside, wearing a black suit so plain it looked like a uniform. No flashy tie, no heavy watch, just an envelope in his hand and a calm expression that suggested he did not care who in this room had money. He walked straight to the clerk's desk, bypassing my parents and Madison, as if they were part of the furniture. He did not look at them. He spoke clearly, his voice devoid of the theatrical tremor my mother had just perfected. He said my name, Miss Vale. The judge reached for his glasses again, watching the man, like he was a glitch in the proceedings. The man in black placed the envelope on the desk and spoke to the bench. This is for the court, from the trustee. The judge did not open the envelope like it was routine mail. He held it between two fingers, staring at the return address, as if the ink might change if he looked hard enough. Then he tore it open. One clean rip. I watched Madison's face. For the first time, her composure did not just crack. It vanished. She knew that return address. It was the mark of the one institution she could not charm, bully, or buy. Hawthorne National Bank Trust Department, the judge read aloud. The words hit the room like a physical weight. This is a notice of trust administration. It states the decedent's assets were placed into an irrevocable trust upon his death. It identifies the successor trustee as Hawthorne National Bank. Madison's attorney stood up so fast, his chair screeched against the floor. Your Honor, we are in probate. This is an emergency filing regarding the respondent's capacity. The judge did not even look up. Sit down, counsel. This certification states in plain language that the probate estate is minimal. The bulk of the assets, $150 million, is held in trust. A corporate trustee is in place. That means your motion for guardianship is irrelevant. Miss Vale does not control the money. The bank does. And the bank does not have a psychological collapse. I looked at Madison. She was staring at the man in black, Julian, with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. She had spent her whole life equating wealth with power, assuming that because she looked the part, the world would hand her the keys. She did not understand the difference between having and being. In my family, wealth was a leased identity. Madison and my parents were obsessed with having the right coats, the right lawyers, the right narrative. They thought that having the appearance of a perfect family meant they were a perfect family, but substance is different. My grandfather knew that. He built his empire on being on the structural integrity of his designs and the ironclad nature of his records. He knew that when the pressure was applied, a structure built on having would crumble, while one built on being would stand. Madison was a facade, with no load-bearing walls. Julian, and the documents he carried, represented the actual foundation. The judge turned a page, and his mouth moved, as if he had spoken before he meant to. Wait, he whispered. That cannot be. He read the next line slowly, making sure every syllable landed in the silence of the room. No contest clause triggered. Any beneficiary who petitions to seize trust assets contrary to terms or seeks to invalidate the distribution through litigation immediately forfeits their entire share. Madison's face did not just go pale, it drained of everything that made it look human. The tailored cream coat suddenly looked like a shroud. By filing that motion to seize control of the inheritance, effective immediately, she had not just tried to erase me, she had just written herself out of $150 million. The air in the courtroom did not just feel cold, it felt clinical, like the edge of a scalpel. Julian did not flinch at Madison's collapse. He simply reached into his briefcase and produced a second, thinner envelope. Your Honor, the decedent anticipated this theater, Julian said, his voice a flat line of corporate procedure. He maintained a forensic log of every interaction in his final months. He knew that when the crown was empty, the vultures would arrive. The judge took the digital recorder, Julian offered, as if it were a live round of ammunition. When he pressed play, the room was swallowed by the sounds of my grandfather's dying breaths, a wet, rhythmic struggle that made my mother's lavender perfume feel like poison in my lungs. But it was not the breathing that stopped the room. It was the greed. Just sign it, you old fool, Kenneth's voice echoed off the mahogany. We have reallocated everything else. This last deed is all that is left. Just let us guide your hand. Then came Stephanie. My mother, the woman who had just dabbed her eyes with silk. Grace is not coming back for you, she hissed on the tape, her voice stripped of its motherly facade. She has forgotten you. We are the only ones here. Sign the transfer. I closed my eyes. In that moment, the invisible shackles of my childhood did not just break. They evaporated. I heard my grandfather's slurred, sedated voice, a sound of pure, exhausted resistance. Never. I heard a scuffle, the crash of a medical tray, and then the monitor beeping, in a panicked, high-pitched frenzy, before someone, likely a nurse, burst into the room, and the recording ended. The judge set the recorder down. He did not look at Madison. He looked at Kenneth and Stephanie. The accusation of elder abuse they had tried to pin on me had just become their own criminal record. They had not just been ungrateful, they had been predatory. This is not a civil dispute, the judge said, his voice cold and final. This is evidence of a felony. Julian stepped forward, his voice calm but lethal. Correct, Your Honor. The bank forwarded these recordings to the district attorney's office last week. They requested we allow the respondents to confirm their intent on the record today before executing the warrants. My father's jaw ticked, a rhythmic, mechanical twitch of a man who realized his quiet luxury was about to be replaced by a prison uniform. They were not shocked by their own cruelty. They were only shocked that I had stopped being their silent witness and started being their auditor. The ledger was finally balanced. The judge did not just rule. He performed an extraction. With a voice that stripped the room of its remaining warmth, he dismissed Madison's motion for guardianship with prejudice. He did not stop there. He issued an immediate freeze on any contingent distributions meant for Kenneth and Stephanie, effectively cutting off their access to the grandfather's wealth. My parents sat there, their rehearsed dignity dissolving into a raw, ugly panic. They were not looking at the mahogany table anymore. They were looking at the door, realizing that their narrative had hit a wall made of cold, hard facts. The timing was as precise as a closing bell. The courtroom doors opened again, but this time it was not a bank representative. It was a uniformed deputy. He did not look for a seat. He walked straight toward the front row, where my father was still trying to process the collapse of his future. The sound of the deputy's boots on the wood floor was the only noise in the room, a steady, rhythmic countdown to the inevitable. Kenneth Vale? Stephanie Vale? The deputy asked, his voice a blunt instrument. My father could not even manage a nod. He just stared at the heavy packet of papers being held out toward him. You have been served, the deputy said. The headers were visible even to me. Attempted fraud and elder abuse. This was not a civil summons. These were criminal warrants, built on the forensic record my grandfather had left behind. Madison snapped. The tailored cream coat, the perfect hair, the quiet luxury, it all disintegrated in a single, high-pitched shriek. She lunged toward the judge's bench, her hands clawing at the air, as if she could grab the $150 million back from the void. That is my money, she screamed, her voice cracking with the desperation of someone who realized her identity was tied to a ledger she no longer controlled. He promised it to me. You cannot give it to her. She is nothing. I stood up, but I did not match her volume. I did not need to. I looked at her, at the empty crown she was still trying to wear, and I felt a lethal precision take over. Grandpa did not leave a fortune, Madison, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of her shock. He left a record. And you cannot bully a record. Inside, my mind glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. They were not shocked by what they had done to a dying man. They were only shocked that I had stopped playing along and started holding them accountable. The theater was over. The auditorium was empty. And for the first time in 27 years, I was the only one holding the keys to the vault. The dust has finally settled on the probate court, and the air in my new office smells of old stone, blueprints, and the absence of lavender perfume. The seasons have shifted, and with them, the entire architecture of my life has been redesigned. The Hawthorne National Bank completed the final distribution of the $150 million estate, exactly as my grandfather intended. My parents and Madison are no longer the directors of our family narrative. They are merely defendants in a criminal case that they built with their own voices. I recently saw a listing for Madison's townhouse in the historic district. She is liquidating her designer wardrobe and her quiet luxury belongings to pay for the legal sanctions and the professional reputation she torched in that courtroom. Her tailored cream coat is likely hanging in a consignment shop now, a relic of a status she thought was permanent. My parents are navigating a world where their social standing has been replaced by a paper trail of fraud and elder abuse. They were not shocked by the cruelty of their actions. They were only paralyzed by the reality of a record they could not bully. I am currently standing on the site of a historic restoration project downtown, funded by the new Vale Preservation Foundation. We provide resources for architectural preservation and, more importantly, we restore the educational trust funds of students whose parents treated their futures like reallocatable assets. I find my peace in the blueprints now, in the structural integrity of buildings that do not rely on facades to stay standing. To those of you listening who have spent your lives sitting at the spares table, I have a message for you. I know what it is like to be the ghost in the hallway, the invisible observer in a house of glass. I know the weight of the silence you have kept just to survive. But you are not a footnote in someone else's story, and you are not a backup plan. You are the architect of your own light. Stop waiting for them to grant you permission to exist fully. Stop paying the bill for a version of family that only values you when you are useful. The best retaliation is not a loud argument, it is a cold, undeniable record of your own worth. Build your foundation on truth and wait for the last person to arrive with the keys to your freedom. The ledger is finally balanced. My grandfather did not leave me a fortune. He left me the proof that I was right all along. And in the end, that is the only inheritance that matters. If you have ever been made to feel like you did not belong in your own family, share this story. Let them know that a story can be told, but a record can never be bullied. Subscribe for more stories of justice.